Let me take you back to the most beautiful business model ever invented. It's the early 2010s. Silicon Valley has figured something out, something almost embarrassingly simple. Instead of selling software once, as a one-time purchase that customers own forever, what if you rented it to them, monthly, per employee, forever? No big upfront check, just a small, steady, recurring drip, multiplied by thousands of companies, millions of users, year after year after year. They called it software as a service, and it made some of the most ordinary sounding businesses into the most valuable companies on earth. Salesforce, a CRM tool, basically a digital Rolodex for sales teams, worth $200 billion. ServiceNow, essentially a digital help desk for corporate IT departments, worth $100 billion. Adobe, the company that makes Photoshop and PDFs, quietly pivoted to subscriptions and became worth over $250 billion. Atlassian, a project management tool used by software engineers, worth over $60 billion. These weren't companies curing cancer or solving climate change. They were selling software that businesses rented to manage their workflows. But the economics were perfect. Customers signed annual contracts. Switching costs were enormous. Once your sales team lives in Salesforce, tearing it out feels like performing surgery without anesthesia. And every time a customer grew, they bought more seats. More employees meant more licenses, meant more revenue. The model literally grew itself. By 2023, the average enterprise company was running 130 different SaaS tools simultaneously. 130 subscriptions, 130 monthly fees. Nobody blinked. This was just the cost of doing business in the modern world. Investors poured money in, founders became billionaires, venture capital flooded the sector. For nearly 15 years, the SaaS gravy train ran on schedule every single day. And then, in the span of about 18 months, the ground beneath the entire industry began to shift. Here's the uncomfortable question that every SaaS company quietly started facing in late 2022 and tried very hard not to answer out loud. What exactly are we selling? On the surface, the answer seemed obvious. Software, tools, platforms, subscriptions. But dig a little deeper and you realize what SaaS companies were really selling was human productivity. The seat wasn't just a license, it was a proxy for a person, a human being who needed the software to do their job. The entire pricing architecture of the industry was built on one silent assumption. Software always requires a human on the other end of it. In November 2022, OpenAI released ChatGPT, and that assumption started cracking. At first, the SaaS industry reacted the way every incumbent industry reacts to disruption. It co-opted it. Salesforce launched Einstein GPT, Adobe launched Firefly, ServiceNow added a Copilot, HubSpot embedded AI into every feature it could find. The pitch to investors was elegant and confident. We're not being disrupted, we're doing the disrupting. We have the data, we have the enterprise relationships, we have decades of workflow embedded inside our platforms. An AI chatbot built by a startup can't take that away overnight. Wall Street nodded. The stocks kept climbing. Salesforce hit all-time highs. ServiceNow crossed $100 billion in market cap. Everything seemed fine. But the question hadn't gone away. It had just gone underground. And in boardrooms, in CFO offices, in the quiet corners of technology strategy meetings at the world's largest companies, the same uncomfortable conversation kept surfacing. If AI can do the work, why are we paying for the seat? That was the task that the SaaS industry had to figure out. And most of them were too busy celebrating their recent highs to take it seriously enough, fast enough. Let me tell you about the moment the abstract became real. It was a summer 2024 earnings call. Salesforce, the company that invented modern enterprise SaaS, the company Mark Benioff built by famously protesting outside a software conference with signs that read, "Software is dead," reported its results and missed revenue expectations for the first time in years. The stock dropped 20% in a single day, its worst performance in 2 decades. Analysts called it a blip. Benioff called it a transition. But the market was hearing something else. It was hearing the first note of a song that was about to get very loud. A few months later, the Klarna story broke into mainstream business conversation. The Swedish fintech company, under its combative and quotable CEO Sebastian Siemiatkowski, announced it was ripping out over 1,200 SaaS tools from its technology stack, including Salesforce and Workday, and replacing them with internally built AI systems. An AI customer service agent was doing the work previously handled by 700 human agents. Annual savings $40 million. Revenue per employee jumped from $400,000 to $700,000. Siemiatkowski went on every podcast he could find. He stood on stages at conferences. The message was simple: you don't need traditional software anymore. You can build your own with AI for a fraction of the cost. It was provocative, it was attention grabbing, and it was, at least partially, true. There was a twist, of course. By early 2025, Klarna quietly began walking it back. The AI had underdelivered in customer-facing roles. Quality had suffered. They needed to rehire. Siemiatkowski admitted the pivot had been too aggressive. The dream had bumped hard into reality. But here's the thing about a compelling story. Once it's been told, you can't untell it. The Klarna narrative had already lodged itself into the minds of CFOs and CTOs at every major corporation on the planet. And those people weren't asking, did it work perfectly for Klarna? They were asking something far more dangerous. How close are we to a world where it does work? The answer, it turned out, was very close. Because while Klarna's headline was being debated on LinkedIn, something quieter and more profound was happening in research labs and engineering teams around the world. AI was evolving from a chatbot you talk to into an agent, a system that could plan, decide, and act autonomously across multiple steps without a human in the loop. Anthropic released a computer use API, a capability that let an AI model look at a computer screen, understand what it was seeing, and then click, type, scroll, and navigate software the way a human would. Not through a special integration, not through a custom API handshake, just by seeing the screen. Like a new employee on their first day, the implications landed like a stone dropped into still water. If an AI agent can log into your Salesforce, update contact records, generate reports, and trigger automated workflows without a single human user, then the entire per-seat pricing model doesn't just become expensive, it becomes incoherent. Major enterprises began piloting these agentic systems in late 2024 and early 2025. Banks, logistics firms, healthcare companies. The pilots weren't perfect, they weren't flawless, but they were good enough to be genuinely alarming to anyone whose business model depended on charging for human seats. And then the internal memos started leaking. A Fortune 50 company, never officially named but widely reported and believed to be in financial services, circulated internal documents outlining plans to cut Salesforce and ServiceNow license spending by 60% by the end of 2026. Not because the software was broken, because the human workflows that justified the licenses were being automated away. Wall Street didn't wait for confirmation. It reacted the way markets always react when a structural threat becomes undeniable. First slowly, then all at once. Between January 30th and February 4th, 2026, something historic happened in the technology sector. Atlassian fell 35% in a single week. Adobe dropped 19%. Salesforce lost 26% of its market cap. HubSpot, DocuSign, Asana, Workday, all of them cratered in concert. SAP, which had been Europe's most valuable technology company with a market cap of 344 billion euros just 12 months earlier, began a collapse that would eventually erase over $130 billion in value. In total, nearly $300 billion in market capitalization vanished from the application software sector in the span of a few trading days. Hedge funds that had been quietly building short positions for months walked away with $24 billion in profits. The iShares Tech Software ETF, which tracks the sector, fell roughly 30% from its late 2025 peaks. A trader at Jefferies, watching the carnage unfold on his screens, sent a note to clients with a single word to describe what he was seeing. He called it the SaaSpocalypse. The credit markets confirmed the story. Apollo Global Management, one of the most sophisticated institutional lenders in the world, had quietly halved its software sector exposure from roughly 20% of its portfolio to around 10%. Deutsche Bank found itself holding $1.2 billion in loans from a software acquisition it simply couldn't sell to investors. A hung deal. the kind of thing that happens when an entire asset class loses its narrative. But here is where the story gets genuinely complicated, because a market crash is not the same thing as an industry dying. And the truth about the SaaSpocalypse is more nuanced and ultimately more interesting than a simple tale of disruption. Global SaaS spending is still projected to grow from $318 billion in 2025 to over $500 billion by 2028, according to Forrester Research. The core enterprise functions that SaaS serves, HR, payroll, compliance, supply chain management, financial reporting, don't vanish because an AI agent exists. The regulatory requirements, the audit trails, the data sovereignty rules, the decades of workflow embedded in these platforms, those don't evaporate overnight. You cannot just rip out an ERP system because ChatGPT got smarter. Vertical SaaS is holding up particularly well. Companies like Epic in electronic health records or IQVIA in pharmaceutical data serve industries so specialized and regulated that general purpose AI agents can't simply replace them. The market for vertical, domain-specific software is expected to grow from $130 billion in 2025 to nearly $200 billion by 2029. And the incumbents are not standing still. Salesforce, Oracle, and ServiceNow are pivoting aggressively toward what the industry is calling agentic platforms, embedding AI agents directly into their own software so enterprises don't have to choose between their existing infrastructure and AI automation. The argument is compelling. Why trust a scrappy startup's agent to navigate your Salesforce instance when Salesforce itself can build an agent that natively understands the data model, the security rules, the integrations, and the 20 years of customer relationship history sitting inside the platform? The real casualty of the SaaSpocalypse isn't software, it's a pricing model. The per-seat subscription, that beautiful, elegant, self-perpetuating revenue machine, is confronting an existential challenge. Because if agents can do the work of multiple people, charging per human seat is not just expensive, it's philosophically broken. The logical destination is outcome-based pricing. You pay for deals closed, workflows completed, invoices processed, tasks executed, not for licenses assigned to human beings. That transition is going to be brutal for the companies that built their entire financial architecture around seat count growth. Some won't make it through. Others will emerge leaner, more defensible, more genuinely aligned with what their customers actually care about. What we're really watching, underneath all the drama and the crashed stock prices and the hedge fund victories, is a fundamental renegotiation. For 20 years, the software industry maintained an implicit contract with the business world. Pay us monthly per employee, and we'll give you the tools your people need to do their jobs. The stickiness wasn't just about the software, it was about human behavior, the habits, the workflows, the institutional knowledge encoded in how people use these tools. The moat was built from people. AI is dissolving that moat. When an agent can learn to navigate any software interface by looking at a screen, the same way a new hire does on their first day, the switching costs that locked customers into platforms for years start to matter less. The competitive advantage of "your team is already trained on our system" begins to fade. The SaaSpocalypse, a word coined in a moment of market panic on a frantic February morning, but also, maybe, the most accurate label we have for a genuine inflection point. The moment an entire industry was forced to stop pretending that AI was just another feature to bolt onto the pricing page and start grappling with what it actually means when software no longer needs a human in the seat to do its job. The golden age of the per-seat subscription is over. What replaces it will be messier, harder to model, and probably more honest. The companies that understand what they're really selling, not seats, not software, but outcomes, those are the ones who survive what comes next. The ones still selling seats to an increasingly seatless world? Well, the market already told you what it thinks about them.